My idea originally was to kind of focus on season extension and growing year-round. So I grow a lot of spinach and salad mix in the winter in this hoop house. The transplants, that season starts up in January and goes through basically through June. And then the microgreens are year-round. But yeah, because that's kind of, you know, there's a lot of stuff happening. There are a lot of farmers already doing stuff in the summertime, and there's kind of a lack of fresh produce during the winter and spring months, so that was kind of my focus. So the field is going to have a lot of storage crops, the garlic, onions, and then a lot of winter squash on the other side, and I'm also going to do a lot of flowers. The really sweet thing about this property is it's about 40 acres. Rhea Van Atta owns the property, and then there are a few different people that live out here. Doris is amazing, one of the matriarchs here, and she lives in that farmhouse, and then Cindy also lives here. Cindy and Doris and Rhea are all just amazing women that are sort of like mentors for us. Although they're not farmers, but they do a lot of amazing things in and for the community. And then Rachel and Mackenzie from Giant's Farm live in a yurt right over there. We can go see it in a minute. And then we've got, Rhea has about 17 acres in hay. So yeah, so kind of farming and community out here. The neighbor across the street has a couple alpacas here. They've got goats and chickens and turkeys. They help me out, they help water. I mean, they pinch hit for me all the time, and it makes it so much easier. It's really hard to do something like this by yourself, and then they're amazing. They're really amazing farmers, so it's so cool. We share resources, and there's a tractor here that Rhea has for the property, and you know, Doris will mow, and then we get to use the tractor as we need it, and we just coordinate with each other, and it works out really nicely. And then we have, you know, we'll have dinner together, and we'll sit around the fire and play music and drink wine, and it's pretty magical. We kid that it's a commune, but it kind of is, because there are like 5 people living here. I'm not living here, I wish I was. I have dreams of building a tiny house and on wheels and coming out here to live. But I did do a lot of paste tomatoes, Italian paste tomatoes. I sell a lot to Red Haven and Dusty's Cellar, and then just a few restaurants in the area, and ELFCO. I'll sell to ELFCO.
Do you do the cherry tomatoes at all?
Yeah, I've got some cherry tomatoes in the greenhouse. I actually harvested my first Sun Gold. I think I've harvested 5 now, on June 5th.
Nice.
It was great. Oh, they're amazing. Yeah, I'll be doing some cherries, but these are mostly, you know, your typical heirlooms like Cherokee Purple and Striped German and stuff like that. But I also have some
zebra.
And Green Zebra, right? But I've got some really funky kinds like a Black Trifle and a Black Crim and Indigo Rose and all of these funky black heirlooms. So I talked to Tony at Red Haven, and he's like, yeah, sure, we'll try them. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm gonna plant way too many. So I planted this whole thing.
Why would you do this?
Why would you farm?
Yeah, why are you farming?
Because, well, a couple different reasons. It's a way to stay engaged in my community while working in a way that's really fulfilling, because it's incredibly intellectually stimulating and challenging, and physically demanding. I like to be physically engaged in whatever work I'm doing. So, but you know, there's this, I think, perception that farmers are sort of simple-minded people, but I think people are starting to sort of realize the kind of work that goes into it, and that it's not all just grunt labor. So yeah, I love the business side of it, and I love the cooperative side of it, and you know, I think I would much prefer to barter for things than to grow and sell things, but so yeah, you just get to be creative. You get to be an engineer. You know, there are always problems that come up that are frustrating, but really at the end of the day it's fun because you get to, you know, be innovative and creative in ways that I think a lot of other work, at least work that I've been involved in, doesn't really allow for. So it's different when you're physically moving and doing things with your hands and you think through things differently. So that's what I really love about it. I started off growing transplants. I was the propagation manager at the Student Organic Farm originally in 2010, and then I did a few different things there. And I love growing transplants. I love growing seedlings. I grow them for farmers and for gardeners, and I really enjoy that. But I've learned this year that what I really like doing is growing food for people. So I think that's, I don't know, there's something very satisfying about, you know, feeding yourself and people in Lansing, in the Lansing area, are starting to get it, that it's cool to know where your food comes from, and it's also fun and exciting, and we're finding ways to make it more accessible for more people and to make it, I don't know, there are lots of cool things happening in the area, so this movement is really starting to pick up here, and it's the perfect time to be farming. There are a lot of really amazing farmers here too. Pooh from Owasso Organics and Phil, you know, farmers that are they've been doing it for a while, and then there are a lot of, you know, younger farmers that are just getting into this, that have a lot to learn. And you know, I went to the East Lansing market the other day and I got goosebumps. You know, I get goosebumps when I think about it, because there's just this vibe of collaboration and cooperation among everyone that was there. Even though you're competing, you know, for everyone's business, it's all about coming together. And you know, I had a lot of the vendors come and welcome me and pat me on the back and help me pack up my truck without even asking, and it's an amazing community out here. And so that's, I think, why I think I'll stay in Michigan. I'm from Dallas originally. I think people, you know, they hear Michigan has the second highest crop diversity in the country behind California. We're tied with a couple other states, but I mean, that's, people are shocked when, like, well, you can grow peaches here? It's like, yeah, you can. You know, the lake moderates temperatures on the coastline, so we can grow all kinds of tree fruit, and we grow all kinds of berries and grains and vegetables. And you know, when you think of the Midwest, you think corn, soy, wheat, and that's primarily what's grown. You know, and of course there's still a lot of that in Michigan, but Michigan takes advantage of the fact that we do have this climate that enables us to grow a greater diversity of things. And I think that people in Michigan, we've seen like this upheaval, and people have left. We've been sort of abandoned by industry, and people have left that don't want to be here, and the rest of the people that are here want to be here, and they want to make it better. And it's relatively inexpensive to start a business, and so you're seeing all these entrepreneurs saying, what have I got to lose? Don't have a job anyway, you know? And they're going for it. And so you've got people who are energized, and then you've got community members who are excited to support those things. And so I think a lot of it has to do with the economy, but also exposure. You know, there are more and more people slowly getting into it and talking more, and you know, social media obviously has a lot to do with the connections people are making now. And the nice thing about farmer training is if you have the practical skills, you don't have to have an advanced degree. I was actually on my way to getting a master's in public health, which is why I moved to Michigan. So I was living here temporarily, looking for a place in Ann Arbor. Started farming, just volunteering, trying to meet some people, have something to do before my semester started at U of M. And I deferred for a year to go through the certificate program at MSU. And then I ended up never going to grad school and just farming instead. And I started working at the Student Organic Farm. And I've been there for 5 years. And yeah, that's all she wrote. People complain, I've noticed it a lot this year, about the winter here. They're like, God, it's been so cloudy and cold. And I'm like, this has been like the sunniest winter I remember. And I mean, it's cold, but like, I work outside. Hasn't been that cold, you know? And then I realized, like, I live in a greenhouse. Like, I work in a greenhouse, I work in a hoop house, like a passive solar hoop house. It gets really cold in there at night, but I am in like an enclosed structure, but I'm still exposed to the sun. So anytime the sun comes out, I see it. And like, I guess that is, I derive so much energy from the sun. Like, I think it's pretty magical, and I think that I would encourage people to find a way to engage in that way. I think like hoop house technology is really cool because we can grow food year round, but you don't need one of those lamps for your seasonal affective disorder if you can hang out in a hoop house. Just put one in your backyard, go volunteer on a farm that has one. Like, we'll feel better, we'll eat better, and we can eat fresh food in the wintertime, you know, the more of that's going on, I think. That's something that's really, I don't know, stood out. Plug in, appreciate it, be outside, and yeah, do it all surrounding food. I think that's the best way to do it. It's not just about being organic. I mean, in general, local, if you compare prices at a farmer's market, local and organic tend to be pretty close to each other. If you look at the grocery store, there's a significant difference because, you know, that's a whole different ball game in terms of when you're dealing with really large farms, which, you know, even organic farms are pretty mechanized and huge out there in California. But I just try to explain to them, you know, well, the really, really cheap produce that you're purchasing at the grocery store is cheap for a reason. There are a lot of synthetic chemicals that are used that enable the farmer to keep prices a little bit lower because they're able to produce on such a huge scale, and, you know, basically because they're poisoning things that are competing with the crops, so it's creating less work for them, and they're able to do more things on a tractor. And organic standards require that you do as much as possible to prevent disease and pest problems, and then the next step, if you do have some sort of infestation, is to try and control it with what are called biological or cultural methods. So, you know, using
like nematodes and...
Yeah, using like beneficial insects, nematodes and ladybugs and those things, but also you know, using a row cover to cover your plants right after you plant them to exclude certain pests, or removing them by hand or like with a vacuum if you have an infestation of like Colorado potato beetles on your potato plants and things like that. And then if it looks like you're going to have a crop failure, then you can move on to using something remedial, a pesticide. All organic pesticides are derived, I think there's a huge misconception that organic farmers don't use pesticides. They do. But they are all naturally derived and they're not persistent in the soil. So the likelihood of those pesticides killing other things that are beneficial is much less. Although there are some pretty potent organic pesticides. Not much in the way of herbicides though, which is good. Yeah, so I kind of try to explain that, what the difference in, it costs a lot more because there's a lot more manual labor involved in trying to raise healthy plants. You're building up the soil, you're feeding the soil and trying to, I'm putting compost on this soil. Every handful of compost has 2 billion organisms. And, I've got clover pathways that are helping to fix nitrogen, trying to do things that keep the soil alive rather than killing everything off in it with some sort of synthetic pesticide. But, I'm doing this all by hand. You don't have to do it all by hand, but it's a much more intensive process, and you're trying to feed the soil, which then in turn feeds the plants, whereas a lot of conventional food is grown with synthetic fertilizers that they're just trying to give a shot of nitrogen to the plant that is a synthetic shot of nitrogen. So, what's taken up by the plant and then put into the fruit that you're going to eat is synthetically derived. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not nutritious, but I like to think that, it's probably makes a difference. Yeah, so that's part of the reason being certified is kind of important to me, I guess. There's a system of accountability and a standard, albeit one that's set by the government, and one that, if I had it my way, it would be the other way around. You'd have to get certified to spray crap all over your food. And use the precautionary principle like they do in Europe. But we're not there right now, so until then, unfortunately, organic food is going to cost a little bit more because the farmer has to pay for the price of certification and spend a little bit more money, a lot more money, especially on labor, to do those things that keep plants healthy and free of synthetic chemicals. It's kind of crazy, all of the work that goes into getting certified organic. It's not that bad. You should be keeping those records anyway, I think. What you put on your field and when, and that's just smart farming practice and a smart business practice. But,
Yeah.
but I can see why people don't want to do it.
To be certified, is that per individual crop, or is that for the entire operation?
It depends. So Rhea is certifying her hay through my business, and all of the vegetable crops and flowers and everything is all one fee. If I had livestock that I also wanted to certify, that would be additional. If there's something that you want to throw in that's like a different product, they tack on more, but it's basically for your whole operation. I mean, if it was per crop, a lot of small organic veggie farmers will farm, 180 plus different crops, and that's a huge part of, having that diversity it's a security. So if something does wipe out all of your Swiss chard, like it's doing with mine right now, you've got all these other things to fall back on. But it would also, the process of paying, or I guess the cost would be too great if you had to certify every single crop. But they do go through and they look at every single crop, and they look at every single seed packet, and they make sure that you're looking at, can I source this seed organically? Okay, no. If not, can I get it from a source that's untreated?
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's just the whole operation, and then it's usually vegetables, and then there are like field crops and row crops, and livestock. The NOP, the National Organic Program, through the USDA sets out all of the organic standards, and that's basically where all of the different certification agencies, like, they're usually nonprofits or often nonprofits. Like, I certify through OFA, Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Alliance. The agency that sends out the inspectors to the farms and goes through all your paperwork and keeps up with all of the guidelines, and you know, is a resource for farmers when it comes to answering their questions about certification. They're the ones that set the price. So I think this year it was $950 to certify. That's every year, which is expensive. There used to be a cost share through the USDA, through the Farm Bill. And that's gone now in Michigan. So that's a big deterrent, a big barrier for a lot of farmers, is they don't have that cash to front, you know. And in a lot of areas, it's not worth it to certify. Like here, the reason I certified was because I'm selling transplants, and there were a couple of organic farmers that wanted to buy transplants from me, and so those orders paid for my certification, so it made it worth it to me. But I can't necessarily charge a premium for my product at this point. I think at ELFCO, you know, it's sort of expected that produce is going to be sustainably grown, or, you know, ecologically produced, or whatever people call it. But yeah, so it's a major deterrent. It's pretty expensive, but at the same time, there's a price premium for organics. If there's a demand for it, and I'm starting to see more of a demand among people at market, you know, then it's worth it, because you can make that, you know, $1,000 back pretty quick.
What sort of inputs do you have here to your soil?
So that was so the first thing we put in here was buckwheat. It's a good potassium forager, and the this soil is low in potassium. So it'll forage for that, and then you mow it down and it decomposes and just adds to the soil. You know, the soil microbes will eat that up and poop it out, and you know, every time you do that, it's called green manure. Like this clover, you know, I seeded this in the fall, and it made a pretty nice stand this spring, and I've just been mowing it, and every time you mow it, it goes back down and feeds the soil, and then I just tilled in, and I'm leaving these clover pathways, but I tilled it in, you know, you can see this is the clover that I just tilled this morning. This will turn into nothing by tomorrow. I'll be able to plant into it. Some things like rye, things that are a little bit more fibrous take a little bit longer to break down, but you're basically feeding the soil, you're feeding the microbes in the soil, and they're doing all the work for you. So they're, you know, you're adding soil organic matter. It's like adding compost, but without the composting process. You just let the microbes in the soil, keep them healthy, and just feed them with green manure. So I use cover crops and a lot of compost. I spread a lot of compost, 20 yards to this acre, so which is, you know, ends up sort of like being a dusting when it comes down to it, but I also, you know, put it exactly where I'm going to plant the plants to give them a little bit of a boost when you plant them. And those are the main things I use. If you know, and it's important to get a soil test every year, so to see if you're deficient in anything. All of this soil tends to be pretty acidic, so we added lime. And then deficient in potassium, so we added potash, potassium sulfate, and just those things are mined, which isn't ideal, but it's the kind of thing
natural.
that, yeah, it's natural, and it helps give, you know, that microbial community a little boost. And then, you know, like I said, you can use cover crops and other things to sort of balance it out. And with regular compost applications, things will sort of start to equalize, and certain crops need certain conditions, you know, but in general, for diverse vegetable production, pretty good with compost.